So Christmas fast approaching around the corner, and if you haven't had time to do everything, because there is a lot to do with Christmas, decorating the house, thinking about door welcomes, thinking about what's going on the table, what are you cooking, who's coming, who's sitting next to who, of course, who's wearing what amazing Christmas jumper. There's a little bit too much going on. So I'm just here really to tell you about some quick shortcuts that you can make. You've already seen my candle video about Christmas decoration with candle, which is really quick, simple and easy, and quite stylish, I think. And now I'm going to show you, if you've done everything and you've suddenly forgotten my door welcome, what am I going to do? I'm going to show you how to make one using some simple foliage from the garden, and that couldn't be easier. So you don't need Christmas foliage, you don't need to whip back off to the florist, and you don't need to go to your neighbour's garden and steal everything they've got to make it happen. Now, the first thing I want to tell you about is the kind of ring you're going to be using. Now, you can make one with chicken wire and moss. That takes a little bit of skill, to be honest. So if you're a first timer or if you haven't got time, don't worry, that isn't an essential way to do it. The easiest way is to purchase one of these pre-formed rings. Now, there are the traditional Oasis, which doesn't compost, so that's not so good to use, and then there's this new green bio Oasis. It's not really called Oasis anymore, but it's bio foam, let's call it, which after Christmas, as long as you take anything metal and plastic out, can go straight into the compost and there's no need to worry. So that's what I'm using here. I've pre-soaked it, which is really crucial for this. So what I do is put it face down in a wheelbarrow of water or somewhere where it will submerge the whole thing. Watch it sink, leave it there for a couple of minutes, then pull it back out and let it drain off a little bit so it's perfectly hydrated for what I'm going to do. And the next thing that I do is go out into the garden and cut the foliage that I'm going to be using, and I'll be explaining the foliage I'm using here in a minute. And I stand that in water overnight so that it is preconditioned, it's perfectly hydrated, and there's no chance of any immediate wilt. So those are the first two things. The second thing we want to do is make sure we can attach this to the door. So using some wire, what I tend to do is make a figure of 8 loop. First thing to do is to put it around the ring and attach it really, really tightly as you can, by binding it around each other. So you should have something that looks like that. And then to make this loop, what I do is cross them over each other, but then fold them back on each other and around. There's a lot of each other here, but to make, so you can imagine it, 2 hoops that interlock. That way, the strain of the foliage and the Oasis won't pull the wire apart, and when that's hanging on the door, that will be perfectly safe. So I tend to put that bit at the top out of habit, so I'm looking at it as if I were approaching the door. And what I think about now is how I'm going to arrange my foliage. Now, I want that to be in a gentle arc. It doesn't have to concentrically follow the foliage around. Some people like it to do that, some people like it a bit more random. Really, it's up to you how you want to do that bit. But what I tend to do is put it on the ground and then think about the foliage I'm going to be using. I've got my secateurs to hand as well. Now, I've chosen from the garden some really easy, simple things that we've all got. I've got some rosemary here, some's just fallen on the floor. I've got a lot of bay, which is really persistent and good use, and I've got some eucalyptus. I'm going to keep it really simple. What I'm going to do is cut the bay, first of all, into usable sections. So I've got the nice tip piece, which I want to keep forefront in my wreath, and then I've got some other pieces, and I've cut them all roughly to about 10 centimeters, and I'll rearrange them as I go, and I start putting those into my wreath. The ones to the back arch backwards as if they're going to go in against the door, because when you open the door, what you don't want is the ring of what you've constructed your garland out of to be really obvious to your visitor. So make sure that those bits arch backwards, and that will really help make it look really nice and natural and green. Now I'm going to go in blocks. I'm going to do a block of bay, then I'm going to do a block of rosemary, and I'm going to continue all the way around like that until I've finished. And it is, you'll notice, quite cold work on the hands, so I'll keep going with that now. Now you'll see that I've started there a quarter of the way around, keeping it really nice and bushy and quite naturalistic. I'm now going to put in a little bit of rosemary using the same principle and bush out another section. So I'm going to cut sections, again about 8-10 centimetres long, which I'll feed into the wreath. As you can see, I'm about halfway around now with 2 sections of bay and 1 box of rosemary. I'm going to continue all the way around like that, and then I'll be on to the next step. Thank God it's not live. Okay, so you can see I finished going all the way around with my 2 main foliages, which is the bay and the rosemary. And I was thinking whilst I was doing that, actually if you don't like Christmas tree foliage, this is a great way of making it a little bit different and still very seasonal. So that's the first stage. Now what I've also chopped from the garden, got some here, is some eucalyptus. Now if you've got space, eucalyptus is really expensive in the florists. If you've got space to keep eucalyptus that you can stall or pollard, that means cut down every year, then you'll have this great juvenile foliage every year that you can use cost-free. So what I'm going to do is now just spread that all the way through, just to break up a little bit the blockiness. And eucalyptus is really very flexible and easy for that. So I'm just cutting off sections that I like and largely sticking them in where I fancy. Now these pieces I'm letting be a little bit longer, so I want them to stick above the main body of the rosemary and the bay, just to give it a little bit more informality. And don't be afraid to be random. Okay, so I've stuck my eucalyptus in. You can see if I jiggle it about a bit, that really has just softened it out a little bit. The top is facing me, so I'm going to turn that back to face away from me so I can see my garland as it is. And the next stage is to decorate that however you fancy. So once you've decided on your decoration, you can use baubles, cones, cinnamon, oranges, apples, almost anything you want. Then the ideal thing is to start decorating it. Now my wreath, I'm keeping fairly minimalistic, fairly naturalistic. What I've been doing is using these balls of string, because I'm a gardener. I'm going to put them in my wreath as my main decoration instead of baubles. I think it's quite novel. The thing I've just done is stuck wood in and then wired it through the string to keep that quite nice and firm. And I just want to make sure that all of the sides of that are sprayed with glitter, just to make it a little bit more Christmassy. So I've got my glitter here. Just going to give it a little extra spray, so I know that all sides have one covering. And then what I'm going to do is fix those at the bottom from the top of my wreath, so that they kind of hang nicely at the bottom. I need to give them a nice force in. Right, so they're in position nicely. And then the other thing that I'm going to add is just a little bit of mistletoe, because I think that is really naturalistically Christmassy. So I've got some bits of mistletoe here, which I'm just going to cut down, and then I'm going to feed them in to the garland, just in little clusters, just like the mistletoe would naturally grow, actually. It's very green, my wreath, but I'm quite happy with that, I think. And then the only only other thing I'm going to do to this, just to make sure that it does have a Christmassy feel, is give it a light dusting with this glitter. Now this is a colourless glitter, so it's not a spray paint with the glitter in, it's clear lacquer with the glitter, so it just catches the sun and is a little bit iridescent, and at night time will twinkle quite nicely. That did look a little bit extreme, but I'm just making sure everything's covered. I'm going to let that dry now for about half an hour, and then it will be time to attach that to my front door and add a real bit of naturalistic Christmas welcome to my house. Well, and there we are, my finished wreath on my door. I hope that's been helpful, and with the stress of everything going on at Christmas, I hope this is a quick and easy way for you to add those final finishing touches to the decorations for the festive period. And I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. I look forward to seeing you in the new year.